that's a question that I have towards you, is that in thinking about exercise in this way, you're solving a lot of problems in a lot of ways that might look weird to a lot of people. What is your thought process in approaching these things, and where does that root from? Is it from these conversations with the athletes? Is it common things that you see in specific sports? Is it movement patterns that you see being unaddressed? Like where's that thought process come from?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because I would say if the person I was 4 years ago watched my Instagram stories today, I would definitely be sending them to you and like just hating, you know what
This
I
guy's
mean? Just
fucking
being
on
an
one.
absolute toxic person about what I do. But doing it's so interesting. Like doing what I do now, I think is the most exciting to me in a creative sense, and I think I now have the at least the adequate knowledge behind what I'm doing to I'm not saying this in a concise way, but I feel like I'm knowledgeable enough now that the creative or weird things I do, I understand why they could be beneficial. Whereas before, I think looking at them, I didn't understand a possible benefit to them because my own lack of knowledge. Like, I was just hammering screws in a wall, right? I didn't have a drill. Now I think I have a toolbox that just allows me far more tools. But yeah, how do I come upon the kind of weird exercises that I do nowadays, or different executions of exercises? And I think a big part of it comes from approaching the weight room as a support system for a specific task. So I strongly agree that you shouldn't be sport specific or task specific in the weight room. Like, no, you shouldn't hook a ball up to shouldn't hook a baseball to a cable machine. You shouldn't, swing a med ball like a hockey stick or any of those things, or put all the plates on one side of a barbell and swing it around. No, I don't agree with those things. I don't think we should be sport specific. But I think, I was talking about this with my girlfriend yesterday. I was saying, like, what I think a lot of people don't understand about strength and conditioning is that you have to be very well rounded. You have to have such a diverse, not only toolbox, but experiential box to pull from. And I think, a situation like the combine camp is a great example of it. I don't think there's a single weight room session, upper body, lower body, or otherwise, that didn't have in some way a direct goal of improving the 40-yard dash. And I think if any one of those weight room sessions we had wasn't directly correlated to improving the 40-yard dash, I think as a facility we would have failed the athletes. I think knowing that that's probably one of the number one things that's going to raise or lower the draft stock of these young athletes, I think it's imperative that you have a good enough understanding of what the 40-yard dash entails, sprint mechanics, how it feels, the positions we're trying to create or reinforce, and then understanding, a lot of the exercises that we execute, I don't think are executed with the initial intention of improving the strength or hypertrophy of an athlete. I think they're used as a plan B when an athlete can't stay on the field any longer. If I can't hit any more accelerations with an athlete, if I can't run any more 3.10s, if I can't pull any more sleds with an athlete, I want to be able to come in the weight room, find those same positions, and like you said, from a learning perspective or a learning approach, I want to be able to reiterate those positions again to that athlete. A high bar squat isn't going to be as useful to me in 12 weeks as a banded single leg hip extension drill or hip flexor drill. Like, in the limited time I have with an athlete who's relatively strong, I'm just trying to build more repetitions in the positions I need this athlete to get good in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in seeing it unfold, I do understand that. I think looking at it from the outside, it's a little bit hard to draw those lines. It's a little
100%.
bit hard to see the correlation between that. You said that everything we do in the weight room is to improve the 40-yard dash. Now, looking at that from maybe just I want to even say a strength and conditioning lens, but just a strength training lens. I think a lot of people get stuck in that very linear progression of, not necessarily a linear progression of load, but a linear progression of adaptation. Like, I need to build strength with this, or this workout needs to progress on the last workout. And I think that's for its purpose in general population and most of training, that's a fine way to look at training. But I don't think you can necessarily look at it the same way in this scenario, because you have a very concentrated time to execute on some very specific goals. So it's not necessarily a linear improvement or like step loading progression or something of the sort. It's you kind of take what you can get when you can get it, and it's that might change day to day. The thing that I noticed being in that facility was probably the single most important thing in terms of progression, as in a general sense, was load management, is understanding when you can push where and when you cannot, or when you should not. So from the outside looking in, again through that perspective, looking at a banded hip flexor march, or like a lateral sled pull, or like a B stance concentric safety bar quarter squat, something of the sort, is like, why are we doing this? This isn't something that we can necessarily progress on week over week. So speaking to someone that might look at it through that lens, how would you describe progression over the course of this camp? Because it's not necessarily this thing where we did this last week, so we're going to try and do a little bit more this week in terms of volume or in terms of intensity. It's very much like understanding the adaptation that we can train in the moment and being able to take that as far as we need to take that in that session. So what is your approach on that, or what is your rationale around that in terms of actually outlining what the training should be for a specific athlete?
Yeah, so I think as much it's going to change, athlete to athlete, and some people are going to need something more than others, and whatnot, and there'll be differences. I think the big thing is building, say, a combine camp, and where the 40-yard dash kind of becomes the centerpiece to it. It's understanding where athletes are at day one as they enter the camp in terms of their ability to properly train for the 40-yard dash, where they get to in the middle of the camp in terms of what training looks like for the 40, specific to what we do on the field or the track, and then where they're at in the end as they kind of taper into either pro day or the combine or both. It's understanding that what we're doing in the weight room is just supporting or facilitating either the training to come or the training that's happening concurrently. So early on at the combine camp, guys aren't spending that much time on the field. They're probably running on the track, which is a little bit more forgiving of a surface than, say, the turf will be. They probably don't have cleats on. We're probably afforded more volume, not even necessarily intensity, but we're probably afforded greater volume in the weight room, in particular eccentric volume, because we're not getting as much eccentric load as ground times that are as long as turf. We're not coming out of a three-point stance. We're not kind of concentrically exploding into the race or the event. We're dealing a lot with kind of transferring load into the track. Ground contact times are a lot quicker. They're absorbing less eccentric force early on. They're moving slower. They're more upright. So in the weight room, that's a great opportunity in the weight room to build those eccentric capacities to either yield to force or be strong. For athletes that aren't strong, that's their time. Like, this is where we're going to get them strong, and we actually have a very limited amount of time where we can truly build strength or neurological capacity in these kids to then support what they're about to do on the turf. But you need to know that that's where it's going. So understanding the progression exists in the 40-yard dash training. The progression doesn't exist in the weight room. What you're doing is you're anticipating what the progression is going to be. You're going, okay, in 3 weeks, the time spent on the turf is going to increase. That means longer ground contact times. Players are going to need to be stronger. They're also going to be moving at higher velocities. Well, that means the weight room now needs to prepare these kids to be, quote unquote, durable enough to now withstand the next 4-week block of sprinting. So it's like, okay, now I know that's what I'm doing in the weight room. But once we get into the field, once we get into the turf and we start seeing an increase in ground contact time, an increase in velocity, and harder training sessions, well, now the script has to flip in the weight room. I can't be eccentrically loading kids with long ground contact times and maximal efforts and these kind of long durations of yielding events. I need to go the opposite way. I need to be concentric, short ground contact times, explosiveness, kind of maximal contractions that'll hopefully prepare for that sprint session, but not take away from it in terms of soreness or kind of exacerbating any risk people may have. So I think you can kind of continue to extrapolate that idea of the progression exists on the turf or on the field, and what we do in the weight room is either like a preemptive approach hopefully always a preemptive approach to what we do next on the field.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And the thing that I like there is it's a very different way at indexing exercises. A lot of times we'll think about body part, we'll think about plane of movement, we'll think about modality, but it seems like you're indexing around eccentric load versus concentric load. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the relationship would be, so you're on the track, you're going to have a more firm ground surface, which is going to allow you to be more efficient in transferring force, so lower ground contact time, meaning that it's going to be more of an eccentric bias movement as opposed to being on the turf, a softer surface, longer ground contact time, which means that you're spending more time in the eccentric phase of the movement. And that's the way that you're segmenting the way that you're going to complement what they're doing on the track or the field in the weight room. Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, you're 100% correct, right? So yeah, I'm going to need a greater eccentric or yielding capacity on a track surface, a mondo surface, because it gives back to the athlete more. So as I'm putting force into the ground, I'm going to need to be able to yield to that force because it's giving it back to me equal or greater. When I get onto the turf, it's giving me nothing. I actually need an ability to overcome or create concentric power to create that velocity because I'm not getting anything out of that surface quality itself. But in order to do that, you have to have a huge base level of strength, right? In order to express power, we need to be maximally strong first. Power doesn't come from a place where strength doesn't exist first, so
I
we
love
need to
that.
set that up.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I love that idea. And this is just me kind of clowning on everyone on my internet feed, is that you have these people that are like, I don't know, 145 pounds training power or training power output. But exactly like you said, power is an adaptation that comes after strength.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to be powerful if you're not strong. So there needs to be a level of strength that's established before you can express it as power. And that, as we've talked about on this podcast in the past, there's like the strength or the force velocity curve is that first you need to be able to produce force, and you're going to do that slowly before you can produce force quickly, which is power. So that's, I mean, not to interrupt, but that's a really good idea, and I think that's that line of thinking or that way of indexing exercise is a really powerful lens to look at this through, because it almost defies conventional strength and conditioning or strength progression, right? It's not necessarily this nicely organized linear thing. It's more fluid, dynamic, and you can fit it into a mold when you have the overall progression. Is that okay? Weeks 1 through 4, it's going to be just on the track. Maybe weeks 4 through 8, it's going to be on the track and the field, and then 8 on, it's going to be on the field. So you're understanding that, okay, as we go through this progression, there's going to be a greater demand for eccentric load in the way that they're expressing that power on the field. So there needs to be a lesser demand for eccentric load in the weight room so that they can manage load appropriately. So that's a newer idea to me, at least, and I think a lot of people listening, that's something that they probably haven't wrapped their head around yet. Um, but in kind of going through that, you also mentioned this word that I've seen you bring up more and more lately, and that's durability.